There are fears that the human mind can understand, fears that come with signals, a sudden noise in the dark, footsteps that don't match your own, a shadow that moves when nothing should move. These fears have structure. They give you something to react to, something to interpret, something to escape. But there is another kind of fear, a quieter one, a type of fear that does not begin with movement or sound or warning. It begins with stillness. In parts of Southeast Asia, this kind of fear has a form, not something exaggerated, not something monstrous, but something disturbingly familiar. A shape standing where no one should be standing. At first, your mind tries to correct it, to rationalize what you're seeing, to force it into something ordinary. A piece of cloth, a plastic bag caught in a branch, a trick of light in the distance. But the longer you look, the more your brain begins to resist its own explanations. Because the shape is too precise, too intentional. It has proportion, balance, weight. It resembles something you already know, something you've seen before, but only in one specific context. A body, wrapped, bound, prepared, not for movement, but for burial. And in that moment, something shifts. Because what you're seeing doesn't just challenge logic, it challenges certainty. The certainty that death is an ending. The certainty that once something is laid to rest, it stays that way. And when that certainty begins to crack, fear doesn't come from imagination anymore. It comes from recognition. The Pocong is not designed to terrify in the way most creatures are. It does not rely on distortion. It does not exaggerate the human form. It does not transform into something unrecognizable. Instead, it does the opposite. It remains almost entirely accurate. A human body wrapped in white cloth, not randomly, not loosely, but with intention. Each fold is precise. Each layer is placed carefully. Each knot is tied with purpose. Because this is not costume. This is ritual. Across Indonesia and neighboring regions, burial follows a structured process. The body is washed, handled with care, prepared for its final state, then wrapped in a kafan, a white burial shroud. The cloth is folded around the body, secured at specific points, bound at the head, bound at the feet. These ties are not arbitrary. They represent completion, containment, finality, a signal that the body is no longer part of the living world. But folklore introduces a disruption to this order. Because within belief systems, there exists the idea that death is not instantaneous in a spiritual sense, that for a period of time, something remains, not fully gone, not fully transitioned, lingering. And if the process surrounding death is interrupted, if something is done incorrectly, if something is left unfinished, then what remains may not detach completely. The result is not transformation, it is continuation. A body still held in the exact state it was prepared to leave in. If the image of the Pocong creates discomfort, its movement creates contradiction. Because everything about its form suggests stillness. It is wrapped, restricted, bound in a way that removes mobility. The legs cannot separate. The body cannot pivot freely. The structure is designed for immobility, and yet it moves, not fluidly, not naturally, but in short, controlled motion. A forward shift, a pause, then another movement, often described as hopping. But even that word feels too simple, because what's unsettling is not the action itself, it's the implication behind it. This is not a body struggling against its restraints. It is a body moving with them, as if whatever force is inside is not trying to escape the burial state, but is forced to operate within it. And that creates a deeper kind of unease, because it suggests control without freedom, movement without life. The human brain relies on patterns. Alive things move freely. Dead things do not move at all. The Pocong violates both conditions simultaneously. It moves, but remains bound. It advances, but never changes form. And because of that, it does not behave like something alive or something dead. It exists in between. And that in-between state is where the mind struggles the most. What allows the Pocong to persist is not spectacle, but repetition, the consistency of its accounts. These stories are rarely dramatic. They don't describe elaborate encounters. They don't focus on long interactions. Instead, they are brief, almost minimal. A person driving late at night sees something ahead. A figure standing at the edge of the road. White, still. They slow down, look more carefully, and in that moment, the mind begins to question what it's seeing. Then they pass it, or look away, and when they look back, it's gone. No sound, no trace, just absence. Other stories follow similar patterns. A guard on night duty hears something unusual, checks an area that should be empty, and finds something already there, not arriving, not entering, just existing. Some describe seeing it through windows, standing outside, motionless, visible only when attention is focused, and gone when that attention breaks. What connects these stories is not aggression, it's presence. The Pocong doesn't need to chase, it doesn't need to attack immediately. It appears just long enough to be understood. And sometimes that moment of understanding is more powerful than fear itself. At a deeper level, the Pocong is not about fear in the traditional sense. It is about disruption. Specifically, the disruption of endings. Human beings depend on structure to process death. Rituals create boundaries. They separate before from after. They define a clear transition between presence and absence. Without that structure, death becomes difficult to process, ambiguous, unresolved. The Pocong represents what happens when that structure fails, when something interferes with the transition, when closure is incomplete. It forces a question that most people avoid confronting. What if death does not guarantee separation? What if the systems designed to contain it are fragile? And what happens when something slips through that boundary? This is not fear of a creature. This is fear of uncertainty at the most fundamental level. The uncertainty of whether endings are truly final. Most traditional folklore gradually fades as societies modernize. Urbanization replaces rural life. Technology replaces oral storytelling. Belief systems evolve. And yet, the Pocong remains, not unchanged, but adapted. It exists in modern films, in online videos, in staged encounters shared through digital platforms. But even within these formats, something about it continues to resonate, because unlike many horror figures, the Pocong is not entirely fictional. It is rooted in practices that still exist. Funerals are still conducted. Bodies are still wrapped. Cloth is still tied in the same way it has been for generations. This continuity anchors the fear in reality. It prevents it from becoming abstract. Because people don't just hear about it, they recognize it. And recognition makes fear more difficult to dismiss. The Pocong doesn't need belief to remain relevant. It only needs familiarity. The Pocong demonstrates a specific kind of horror design, one based on reduction. Instead of adding complexity, it removes it. No elaborate features, no detailed mythology required to understand it. Just a single visual concept, a human body, wrapped for burial, appearing where it should not appear. That simplicity forces the brain to engage more actively, to interpret, to question, to fill in what is missing, and what the brain fills in is often more disturbing than anything explicitly shown. Because the Pocong does not define its intent, it does not explain itself. It exists without context, and that absence of explanation creates space for fear to expand. The most unsettling fears are not the ones that feel impossible. They are the ones that feel close enough to reality, to be considered. The Pocong exists in that space, between belief and doubt, between tradition and imagination. It does not demand acceptance. It does not require proof. It only introduces a possibility that the systems humans rely on to define endings may not be absolute. That closure is something constructed, and like anything constructed, it can fail. Because in the end, the fear is not about encountering something supernatural. It is about confronting a flaw in certainty itself. The idea that something meant to remain buried didn't, and that somewhere, beyond the rituals, beyond the final words, beyond the moment of burial, something may still be there.